Hey, it's Trisha. Firstly, welcome to Crime 11, and secondly, happy belated Valentine's Day. I'm like a week late at this point, I know, but I do hope everyone had a good one. But now that it's over and done with, let's spoil the mood a little bit with a case from that very special occasion 15 years ago. This honestly wasn't planned to coincide with the fact that Valentine's Day just passed, but it just kind of worked out like that, so here we are. Right now, we're going to go back to February 2007 to a woman named Jodi Elizabeth Serrin, or Jodi for short. She was 39 and lived in Carlsbad, California. Carlsbad is about 35 miles north of San Diego. She was one of six children born to parents Arthur and Lois Serrin, and she had some mental challenges, including schizophrenia, that rendered her unable to drive a vehicle, for instance. But otherwise, she was highly functional and had been mostly independent for 15 years. She lived by herself in a condo that her parents bought for her in the 1900 block of Swallow Lane in the La Costa section of Carlsbad. And she spent a good amount of time being active in several organizations geared towards people with special needs. Cue Valentine's Day 2007. Jodi's parents, going strong with almost 54 years of marriage at that point, marked the occasion with dinner and a movie. But despite their celebratory festivities, all that day they'd been harboring worries about Jodi. Lois Serrin had talked to her the night before, but they hadn't been able to reach her by phone all that day, and that wasn't normal. So they decided to go check on her after their date, and they stopped by her condo to see what was going on. They got there around 10 and rang or knocked or whatever, and no one answered. They had a spare key, so they went to try to go in, but the chain was on from the inside. Weird, because that would mean someone is probably in there, right? They forced the door open and broke the chain to get in and walked into a well-lit condo that gave the impression that someone was there, but there were no signs of Jodi still. They approached the bedroom door, which was shut, and called out to her, but there was no response, so Arthur Serrin opened the door and was greeted by a startling sight. He had interrupted his daughter during a moment of intimacy. There was a man on top of her, and they appeared to be having sex. Awkward. Arthur didn't particularly care for the idea or the sight of that. I mean, of course, it's her dad. So he asked the man to get dressed and to get out. He left the room, and he and his wife went to another part of the condo to wait for Jodi and her gentleman friend to come out of the bedroom. And they waited and waited and waited and waited some more. After some amount of time, when it became strange that no one had come to meet them yet, they went back to the bedroom to check things out, and this time found something a lot more disturbing. The man was gone, but Jodi was lying in bed nude and was deceased. She had been beaten and strangled and died of blunt force trauma to her head. So that's horrific enough, obviously, but that's not even the kicker here. Her murder hadn't just occurred. She was cool to the touch, meaning she had been dead for many hours by that time, maybe as many as 8 to 12 hours. That's the average amount of time, given moderate temperature conditions, that it takes a body to cool to that extent upon death. So what that means is that her dad actually witnessed this man sexually abusing his murdered daughter's corpse, and it was determined that she had been raped previous to that while she was still alive. But the suspect had completely vanished. There were no open or broken windows anywhere, so what it came down to was a stroke of murderous good luck for him. Despite catching him red-handed in the bedroom, the Serrins had been situated in a part of the condo where they weren't able to see either the bedroom door or the front door, so this guy had been able to make his escape right through the front door, sight unseen. Arthur Serrin hadn't gotten a clear look at him because of the dim lighting in the bedroom, so the only description that he could provide was that it appeared to be a heavier set white male with brown hair who looked to be in his 30s. He threw out the name of a person to the police that he thought it could have been. I assume this was someone that Jodi associated with in some way that he knew of, but the killer, though he managed to creep out of the condo without detection, left behind something very important: his DNA. The police compared it with the person of interest and excluded him, and there were no CODIS hits, so the killer remained unidentified and on the loose for quite a bit of time. About 11 years, actually. The Carlsbad PD would regularly check for database hits to no avail, and most years, around the murder's anniversary, media outlets would provide updates, or lack thereof, just to keep the case in the public eye in the hopes that someone would come forward with pertinent information. But progress was at a standstill for a good while. Jodi's parents were absolutely devastated, of course. Valentine's Day, of all days, instead of a day of love and hearts and sugar and spice and everything nice and whatever, became a dark day for them. It was a triggering reminder of their youngest daughter's horrific murder, understandably, so they took to getting away from Carlsbad on that day each year to try to ward off terrible memories. But other than that, they fervently worked to spread the word about the case in the hopes of obtaining any information that could help solve it. In 2017, marking the 10th anniversary, they honored Jodi with a dedication in the Los Angeles Times, which demonstrated how much she remained at the forefront of their minds even a decade later. That same year, the Carlsbad PD pulled a new trick from their sleeve in that they had started exploring more advanced DNA analysis techniques, particularly phenotyping and forensic genealogy. Phenotyping involves a DNA sample being used to estimate the owner's appearance and ancestry, and the genealogy part deals with tracing an unknown subject through known relatives. Forensic genealogy was notably utilized in the investigation and identification of Joseph James D'Angelo, aka the Golden State Killer, the East Area Rapist, the original Night Stalker, the Visalia Ransacker, and whatever other morbid sobriquets he earned with his antics. He was a prolific serial murderer, rapist, and burglar in the California area from about the mid-70s to the mid-80s, and went roaming free and marrying and raising kids and living his best life until he was finally identified and arrested just over 30 years later in 2018. Jodi Serrin's case marked the first time in San Diego County that DNA techniques like these were used. They had connected with a lab in Virginia that specializes in that sort of thing, and they produced a digital composite image of what the killer could have possibly looked like in 2007. It was predicted that he was of Northern European ancestry, had fair skin, green or blue eyes, darker blonde or lighter brown hair, and maybe some freckles. On the genealogy side, they eventually zeroed in on a likely suspect. Only there was a major problem. By the time they made this progress somewhere around 2018, he was dead. He had killed himself years before and had been cremated, so authorities were left with the conundrum of having no DNA of his to compare to the killer sample. What they did have was knowledge of an ex-wife and son of this person, and they contacted them for help. The ex was named Marissa Mabrito, and she had been married to a guy named David Mabrito until the year before Jodi's murder. They had a son together named Dylan, who was of high school age at the point when the police approached them. They were asked for DNA samples, which they readily offered up, and that enabled the authorities to establish a link between Jodi's crime scene and David. Cementing things further, Marissa identified some sneakers that she recognized as David's. I presume these were left behind at the crime scene during his hurried escape, because who has time to put on shoes when you're trying to get away with murder? David Mabrito was announced as Jodi Serrin's murderer in November 2018, marking the first time that a case in San Diego County had been solved with forensic genealogy. And thus, 11 years and 9-ish months later, the Serrin family finally got somewhat of a resolution. Marissa and Dylan were honored by the San Diego County District Attorney's Office in 2019 with a Citizens of Courage Award for their assistance with the case. It was earth-shattering to them to learn about this dark side of David. This is a comment that Marissa made on his online obituary shortly after his death. It shows how thrown for a loop she was about his suicide and how flowery of a view she had of him. So finding out that he had murdered someone was painful for his loved ones. But they were at least able to glean a little more insight as to what demons may have contributed to his suicide, whereas they had been at loss about it beforehand, it seems. On the Serrin end, they finally had a name and a clear face to attach to the murder of Jodi. In 2015, Lois Serrin had made a very foreshadowing remark, actually, about how this monster could be dead and we will never know. Obviously, that was out of a sense of skepticism as to whether her daughter's murder would ever be solved. But what do you know? She was right. He was dead at that point, but culpability still managed to reach out and touch him even beyond the grave, thanks to the modern wonders of science combined with investigatory prowess. And I personally find that kind of fascinating. There are probably any number of people in the world right now who have similar misdeeds in their past and now have to wonder if that past will catch up to them one day in similar fashion. That's pretty neat. David Aaron Mabrito committed suicide on January 30th, 2011, which was just shy of the 4-year anniversary of Jodi's murder. He was 42 at the time of his death and 38 at the time he murdered Jodi. He had previously been a tile contractor by trade, but as of the later years of his life, he was known to be a transient in the northern San Diego County area. That area includes Carlsbad, where Jodi lived, as well as a town named Oceanside, which is where David previously resided and is about 3 miles down the road from Carlsbad. So we know that he had roots and known wanderings in proximity to Jodi, but it's still a missing puzzle piece as to how he crossed paths with her exactly. The police weren't able to draw any conclusions on that. There was no evidence that Jodi knew David, so it remains unknown how he found his way into her apartment. Carlsbad generally has a reputation for several things, like great weather, expensive real estate, and bad traffic. And it was also deemed the digital capital of California in 2013 by Google because of the notable online presence of businesses, small businesses based out of there. But as far as crime goes, historically, it's been pretty tame. So it's not like she lived in a super high risk area. But interestingly enough, in recent years, there's been an uptick in homeless and transient activity in the area, which people blame for increasing crime. Now, David was a transient, albeit 15 years ago when this occurred, but that just makes me wonder whether Jodi knew him in passing somehow. Did he hang out near her neighborhood regularly? Was he someone she saw around from time to time and spoke to or shot the breeze with? Did he know about her mental status and take advantage of that somehow? Was she someone he just randomly saw and followed home one day? I mean, there are any number of uncomfortable scenarios we could conjure up, but neither of the people involved are alive to shed any light at this point, so I guess we'll just never know. In any case, that's it for now. See you next time and be safe.